welcome back to the Losses Become Gains podcast. I am your host, Tara Accardo, and welcome to episode 5. I am really excited to dig into this particular topic around grief work with you today, but I want to preface this entire conversation by saying that there is so much more to come on this topic. There are clearly a lot of aspects to grief and this whole concept of grief work, but I want to introduce this to you today in case you've maybe heard of it but didn't really know what it was or what this really meant. Or more importantly, if you maybe have heard of it but just needed some ideas to begin your grief work. Maybe that's because you've been avoiding it or maybe lagging on it just a little bit. And this conversation today will hopefully leave you feeling a little more inspired. So again, because this is Losses Become Gains, your gain from today's episode is to walk away with a better understanding of what grief work is, why it is so important to healing from your loss, and how and why putting in this grief work will give you the best chance of living your most amazing, vibrant, fulfilling life after loss that I am always going on about. All right? So in today's episode, I'm going to give you 3 of my biggest recommendations for where and how to start with your grief work. But before we do that, I actually want to kick this off with a quote. And you may have heard of the poet Robert Frost, and you might have heard of this quote of his. And that quote is, "The best way out is always through." Now, I love me some Robert Frost. He was my grandmother's favorite poet, and she actually made me memorize the poem "The Road Not Taken" as a child. I can still recite it by heart. And while I love this quote from a different poem, and there is a throughness to grief that we have to explore, I want to set the expectation that grief isn't something that you get through as though there is another side. And you might know this already. But the thing about grief is that it can make us feel lost in our own skin, right? It's ongoing, it evolves, and it takes incredible patience and compassion with ourselves. And it never really ends. But the thing about grief is there's this unparalleled compassion and emotional depth that we develop with this time. And think about it, like what a gift that is amongst such loss, right? Now, I know you might not be there right now, and that is a-okay if not. But as always, I want to plant the seeds here and enable you to see that faint light at the end of this endless tunnel that you might be venturing down right now. And throughout this podcast, I want us to tap into that together. I want you to tap into that and lean into it and not be afraid to do that. Begin to think about what your loss has and will continue to teach you. So think about it. How are you different? What does your new altered experience look like, and how can you embrace it with some time? How will you turn your loss into a gain, right? That's why we're here. So think about it. Where do you see yourself in a year? Is it more joyful, less regretful or resentful of something, holding in less anger, more at peace? Grief work is a key to achieving this. So let's take a step back and talk about what quote-unquote grief work is anyway. We have touched on this in this podcast a little bit already, in that grief and everything that we experience along with it is a normal response to loss. Now, you might be like, Tara, okay, that's great and all, that's all fine, but I know that. What does that really mean? It means that everyone copes with grief differently, and that is where this grief work comes in. We have to find ways to cope with our grief that work for us. It is not a one-size-fits-all recipe here. And while I am here to give you countless tools and recommendations throughout this podcast, and again, so much more to come from myself and some amazing guests that will be here and will no doubt inspire you, I will always encourage you to take your grief into your own hands and to feel empowered in doing that. It's about discovering what speaks to your soul and elicits the most healing possible, the most effective healing. Now, where grief work is concerned, This is the process of actively working through all of the feelings and emotions that come with losing something or someone important to you. The first and most crucial aspect of grief work that I want to address today is expressing your emotions and letting those out. This is what allows us to understand them and to process them. Now, you might be sitting there or on a walk or driving and being like, sure, I've heard this before and this is something I know that I have to do. But let me ask you something. Are you really getting to the bottom of what exactly you're feeling? Are you identifying your emotions past I'm hurt or I'm in pain or I'm sad or I'm angry, whatever this looks like for you? Now, Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, is an amazing book and helps dig into a wide variety of emotions that we might feel, grief or not, and gives some context around them. So that's not what I'm going to do here today. Definitely check out that book if that sounds enticing to you. But the reason I bring this up is because by getting specific with our emotions, we can better and more intentionally address them. That is why this is so important. And that's the thing with grief. We have to allow ourselves to feel these emotions fully and relentlessly. Does it hurt? Yes, it can. Does feeling these emotions get kind of old and exhausting sometimes? Also, yes. But the more we face them, the more we give them their moment to shine, right? And then let them go. The more of an emotional callus we build up, as I like to call it. I know that's kind of gross, but that's kind of what it is. That emotional callus, this is where the healing happens. So whether this is in the comfort of your own home and having a good crying sesh by yourself or screaming into a pillow, or maybe it's something that you talk out with a friend or a family member, or maybe even a therapist or a counselor or a grief coach, maybe individually or in a group setting. The most important aspect here is that whatever range of emotions you're feeling isn't being tamped down, not just bottled up and put on the shelf. Now, I know how difficult this can be, especially if you are in the very early stages of grief, and also early stages or not, especially if you are in a public place and maybe like losing it a little bit or, succumbing to a ball on the floor just isn't an option. I hear you, and many of us have been there. And we're going to get way more into this on this podcast, but so much of grief work is also managing these emotions and gaining the skill to work through these in any given moment. So while acknowledging and letting our emotions flow is a super important aspect of healing, it is not the end-all be-all. Grief work goes beyond this. And even though this is really, in my opinion, the biggest step and one I absolutely encourage grievers to do the most. But another piece of grief work that's sort of number 2 in my lineup today is journaling or writing about your thoughts and feelings. Now, maybe you're not much of a journaler or writer. That's okay. I want to start this off by saying, number 1, I'm not really either. I'm not very good at just like free writing and just like letting the thoughts out. I've gotten a little bit better at it, but it's really not my thing. I actually really enjoy prompted journals. So as I'm going through this next section, make this work for you, right? Think about how you can incorporate this into your daily life. Now, expressing our emotions and feelings is one thing, out loud, or to someone else. But writing them out can be really cathartic too, and is a super powerful tool for processing our emotions and everything that we're thinking. And what I love about journaling is that it can also help you identify patterns in your emotions or your thought processes. So, for example, we might be getting really hung up on, I'm just going to use this as an example again, not being there for our dad when he died. And I use this as an example because this was actually something I really struggled with. Same thing with my dog, to be honest with you. And there was a lot of regret around both of these situations for me. So in journaling something like this out, putting pen to paper and putting these feelings down somewhere other than just having them swirling around in our brain, this does 2 things. The first benefit is that it can begin to alleviate the constant nagging in our head because it allows us to channel this energy into another life form. And your journal this piece of paper becomes this life form in a sense. So think about if you were like trying to go to bed and something is just gnawing at you. When you write things down, it puts that thought elsewhere, or at least in another place other than just jailed in your brain, right? What I used to tell myself when I couldn't sleep because these repetitive thoughts were keeping me up at night was that if I write it down, I could always revisit it tomorrow. I was almost like, that's now a tomorrow problem, okay, right? Now, really important part here. This isn't to continue pushing these feelings off and away and to not deal with them. Not at all. It's just giving them the time and attention that they deserve, that we need to work through them at another time of day other than when we're trying to get some shut-eye. A time when the brain of a lot of grievers ends up being the most active. A lot of time can be in the early morning or as we're trying to go to bed. That's when things tend to really flip on. So writing or journaling before bed is a tool to hopefully give you just a few minutes of peace. And this leads me now to my next point. The second benefit of journaling or writing out what our emotions are is that when they are sitting there right in front of us and staring us in the face, there's nowhere for those to really hide. It's very humbling when you have those words sitting there staring back at you. And it's one thing to put them down on paper, but with grief work, I want to take this a step further. It's writing these thoughts and emotions, but then asking ourselves, okay, why am I feeling this particular emotion or type of way so intensely? Is there something else I need to be considering here? Is there another way that I can begin to think about this? What is one thing I can do today to help me move away from feeling XYZ? See how those questions, and those are just a few examples, but do you see how those kind of open us up a little bit more? It gets the juices flowing a little bit. It's getting us out of our bubble of grief for a moment, because we could so easily have these emotions and we could just so easily be like, I'm feeling a lot of guilt over this, or I'm feeling a lot of anger around this or that or another thing, right? But when we not only just accept that, when we dig deeper and be like, okay, but why? We're challenging our grief. And that's something you're going to end up hearing me say a lot. I want us to challenge our grief. This is something I wish I did sooner. And this doesn't come right away. I don't want you to ever force this challenging of your grief, especially in very early stages of it. We have to feel it. I don't want to say almost have to allow it to overcome us a little bit, but my point is this challenging aspect might not come until a little bit later. But if you're to the point now in your grief where you've kind of had enough and it has been affecting you for too long, this message is kind of for you, okay? All right, so speaking of getting the juices flowing and getting us out of our bubble, my last important recommendation of where to begin with grief work today comes in the form of physical activity. I cannot exclaim enough about how important this is. And I mean, grieving or not, this is important to incorporate into our daily life in general, right? We all want to be healthy. I would imagine we want to be the healthiest, happiest versions of ourselves. But why is this especially important while we're grieving? Well, there are a few reasons for that. Before we get there, I want to acknowledge how unappealing getting out and getting that fresh air, or even moving off the couch and unlocking our front door can be when you have suffered a loss. It might take every ounce of energy you have to just go to the mailbox or take your dog out for a walk, for example. And I use those two examples because those are things that happened to me, and that is exactly how I felt. I didn't want to do much of anything, really. What I encourage here are baby steps, as always. And not only that, but to start to set goals for yourself. So you might be like, okay, Tara, what do you mean by that? I mean that if you are going to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to go for a 5 to 10 minute walk today, then do that. Fulfill that promise to yourself. And you'll hear me say this a lot, maybe if you're on my mailing list or if you follow me on social media, but so much of healing from our grief and understanding how to do life, so to speak, without our loved ones is finding ourselves again and getting comfortable in our own company. And a part of that is learning to trust ourselves. And by fulfilling these little itty bitty baby promises to ourselves, we're building that. We're building on that. Now, are there room for ebbs and flows here? Absolutely. There might be days when we really do want to get out and we really are trying, but we are just too tapped out. Listen, that's okay. Listen to your body and what your mind needs. But I also want to encourage you to challenge yourself a little bit. We have to push it a little bit. And again, if you're listening to this and your loss happened maybe like a week or two ago, or this is really new, I wanna acknowledge you here, and I want to caution against this, right? This might be a little too pushy for you. Just know where you're at. But just to, again, plant the seed, that's grief work. We have to take these baby steps, however small they are, to just begin. And frankly, I think it's more effective when it's us pushing ourselves versus others trying to push us, right? If someone else is telling you, oh, like, let's go get a drink, or oh, just go on a quick walk, or it's almost like a little suffocating sometimes. That truly did happen to me. I had some friends that were like, they meant well, they absolutely did, but they were like a little pushy sometimes. Almost one of them, God bless her, was like almost a little bit like a parent. And I was like, okay, not only did I just lose mine, but I don't need another one. This is not what I need right now. I'm sorry. So, it doesn't always land well, right? Even if people are coming from the most loving place. The motivation to do this, to do all of this, has to come from within here. And I'm pointing to my heart right now, if you are not watching the video version of this. And one of the most important aspects of exercise too is that it helps us manage our emotions. It is hardly a secret that physical activity can be an amazing way to release pent-up emotions and reduce stress, right? By releasing these endorphins and taking in all of that amazing fresh air, or at least the atmosphere of a gym for a little while, this can be a huge benefit to our mental health. And, I want to ask you here, have you ever been in a situation where, let's say, you did not want to work out, but then you maybe started doing it, and once you got in the groove a little bit, especially once you finish it, you feel better. You are probably happy you got up and did it. And maybe once you got going and promised yourself, again, remember those promises, that you'd maybe just do 5 to 10 minutes to start. You just kept going because it actually felt pretty good. You're already kind of on a roll. So maybe you're like, okay, what's 10 more minutes? And all of a sudden you're up to like a 20 or 30 minute workout, maybe more. Remember that feeling. Remember that tension that you're able to release, that big, beautiful breath that you're able to take when you complete a walk or a workout or yoga or whatever this looks like for you. And by the way, when I say workout, do what looks and feels best to you on any given day. And this can change based on the day. In fact, it probably should. It's good to get a little bit of variety. And so, for example, when I was in my earlier days of grief, I was in no mood to do, I'm not really much of a runner anyway, so running was really not on my list, but I wasn't, in the mood to do HIIT or high intensity interval training, which is something that I do tend to put into my workout regime a little bit. I had really also been into weightlifting actually, and honestly, all of those things, that felt like a lot of effort. So I used this opportunity to take a step back and be like, okay, I know I need to get some movement in. What do I feel like doing? And for me, what came naturally was more lower impact exercises. So yoga, some Pilates, maybe just some easier moves, but with an exercise band or something with some added, just added the intensity a little bit without going crazy with it. And walking was and still is really huge for me. So again, it's just my journey, but I'm just throwing some ideas out here to you. So think about this a little for yourself. What could this look like for you? And depending on where you're at with your grief, this might look different each day. You might not be here yet, But just remember, no matter what, the point is the effort. And I also just want to caution you, this is like a really tricky balance with grief, right? But be cautious with what excuses you might want to make to yourself, because it's really easy to be like, nope, it's a couch day, I'm good. It's this balance of still knowing that we need to do right by ourselves and we need to challenge ourselves a little bit, as we always kind of have to do in life, but knowing what we need. So with that being said, I want to finish this up by saying that if you are really just emotionally exhausted and struggling more than usual on any given day, allow yourself to have that day. You can always start fresh tomorrow. And it's almost like knowing like, okay, you know what? Today was maybe not a great day. Today was not my day. But tomorrow, that is a brand new, amazing day. And we almost like kind of can't help but feel a little bit of hope through all that too, right? And you're kind of coaching yourself through this a little bit, and that can be really encouraging. It's important to make the effort, but our mental health is especially delicate, especially when grief is newer. Know what your body needs and what feels good and what doesn't. And the more you tap into this, the more you like continue asking yourselves these questions, the more that this is going to come naturally to you. And again, this is a beautiful opportunity to start getting to know yourself on a new level, going inward and listening to that voice and what it is asking for. Now, are there other ways to approach all of this grief work too? Yes, absolutely. As I've said, more details on each of these are to come in future episodes. Whether it is practicing relaxation techniques, creating a memorial for the person who has died, or incorporating their memory into your life in some new way, prioritizing your self-care, finding meaning in the loss through activities that you do, and all of these are critical in finding a very well-rounded healing process. And we will get there, I promise. But at the end of the day, allowing ourselves to feel and express everything that we've got going on in our head without judgment or criticism is key. Even if they are maybe a little difficult or uncomfortable, which they likely will be. It is all about acknowledging them, giving them these emotions the moment that they need to come into your focus, for you to comprehend them, and that's when we can begin releasing and surrendering these things. The intensity of these emotions usually naturally eases up a bit. But we have to remember that we can't just go through the motions and hope and pray that things will change. That is how so many grievers get stuck. Or they kind of like think they're doing everything right, but they're not looking inward. They're not asking the tough questions of like, okay, what does this loss actually mean for me now? Grief work is the action, but there is also the process of reflection and asking ourselves these tough questions. This is not always the easiest or the most pleasant thing to do, let's be real. And we might not know the answers. That's okay. The point is that we're asking. And we might not always like the answers, even if they do come, or we might not even understand what to do with it all. That's okay. There's no pressure here. But as more comes to the surface, that's where we can begin to feel this really incredible, powerful shift in our grief. And I have no doubt that you can and you will get there. So with that, we will end this somewhat short but hefty episode here for you today. Thank you so much, as always, for hanging out with me. I truly hope this topic resonated with you in some way and perhaps maybe sparked a little insight or encouragement on your journey with grief. And with that, I will see you in the next episode. Also, remember to follow along if you're not already at Losses Become Gains on Facebook and Instagram, and visit my website for more information, coping tools, and information on my Grief Becomes Gains online course. And be sure to hit that subscribe button if you love what you are hearing here. I'll see you next time.